welcome Joe to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
It's so good to have parents on because I've really been, we were just talking about this before I hit record, that I think so many parents want to hear other people's stories, especially when they're feeling overwhelmed. I'll see this in the Facebook groups too, of like, just somebody tell me something hopeful, or somebody tell me that they've been through this and they got through it and they went to the other side. And so I was so grateful when um, I don't know if I reached out or if you reached out. I think you reached out and said, I'd love to share my story. And I love when people do that because it helps so many people. So I wanted to talk about tapping into online support. But before we get started, let's just dive in a little bit to what was going on in your life, in your world with your daughter before I met you.
Okay, well, I think it probably started when she was very young. I mean, when she was about 4, I remember we were driving and she just said to me, one side of my mouth is a boy and one side of my mouth is a girl. And I have to chew the same number of times each side before I can swallow. And I just sat there and I thought, well, that's very descriptive and unusual, and didn't think much of it. And so there were little things like that that would crop up that I thought was just a bit of quirky behaviour, to be honest. And it was probably about 5 years later or so, I guess when she was about 9 or thereabouts, and I was starting to have real concerns about her anger and how aggressive she was being towards me. I spoke to a charity called Young Minds in the UK, who I found online, and they sort of advised to speak to a doctor or go to her school. And she talked to a school counsellor for a little while, but that sort of went wrong because she ended up sharing some sessions with another child, and they were very much focused just on anxiety. And she was adamant to me, I'm not anxious. It means nothing to me what they were saying. And to be fair, she comes across as a very sort of talkative, confident young lady, and not afraid to stand up for herself or others. And it almost seemed to become like she was just a strong-willed girl and probably difficult to parent, and that's why she'd get angry if things didn't go her own way. So I think it was reaching quite a height, quite a crescendo, and I was looking up things on YouTube of sort of help, because I was really struggling with it. And as a parent, sometimes you blame yourself and you're thinking, I must be making things worse. And all the angry words that they use directed at you, you can really start to absorb it. And that's why I know you sort of focus on sort of getting help for parents as well, and the importance of self-care for parents. So really, it was when I was then looking up on YouTube, I think the algorithms must have worked out what was going on.
That's a miracle.
Yeah, and started suggesting some of your videos. And it just clicked into place. I thought she must be going into a rage over what seems minor, but actually I'm interrupting her rituals. And before then, I would have had no idea that I was dealing with OCD here, probably because of the stereotypes. I mean, her bedroom was messy, she resisted having showers, and I just didn't see it as OCD. And I had sort of had some mental health training, and that I used to be a hypnotherapist, and I'm also a mental health first aider at work. So a bit of a background, certainly not expertise, but I was aware of it. And I'd known a couple of people that had OCD as well. But I'd never picked up that this anger and aggression could have been linked to OCD. So it was only on reflection that I thought those quirky behaviours, it just seemed to ring true. So the videos really helped me, and we also watched them together, and she seemed to recognise it as well. And I think she definitely drew some comfort there from realising that she identified with it. And she knew that she wasn't alone. So she really liked the analogy about having to stand up to the bully in her mind, and that sort of thing. So that really helped, because I think some of the words perhaps the school counsellor was using around anxiety made her feel like she was being accused of being weak, or something like that. But this sort of seemed to empower her a little bit more to stand up to it. So that was brilliant. but it wasn't, certainly wasn't getting any better. And I
And I
was,
want to pause you there for a second,
yeah,
just because I think you're bringing up some really good points that I want to highlight. Um, First, that difficult behavior is sometimes a symptom. And I think that that's just a really good thing to highlight, because a lot of times I think parents don't realize that they're connected. They think, even if they have a diagnosis of OCD, they're like, and there's this really difficult behavior going on. And I don't know if that's something you want to touch on, or if that's, I need to go see another therapist for. And it's like, so I love that you're bringing that up, that there was like this disruptive anger, because when you do have all these compulsions in your head and you have all these rules, that's very stressful. And when your parents aren't doing the things that your OCD wants, you definitely want to push back and get very angry at the people that aren't fulfilling those OCD loops. So I think that's a really good point. The other point you brought up is you have some mental health background. And actually, I interviewed a mom last week. So this was the last episode that actually went on. It hasn't really in real life yet, but it will be. Um, was also, has a mental health background. And I think that I'm just a little bit on my soapbox about this, but I feel like parents don't realize that as mental health professionals, we're really not trained to see beyond um, the stereotype of OCD. So when you see your child has a messy bedroom, doesn't like to take showers, so many parents tick off that box of OCD as not an option, because they say, well, if she has OCD, she would definitely want to take a shower. And not realizing that a lot of times kids do not want to take a shower, because it might be way too ritualistic, or it may not have anything to do with their OCD, or their room might be a disaster because things are contaminated all over the floor, or it may not have anything to do with their OCD. So you're bringing up some fantastic points that I wanted to highlight before you went further into your story, because I think they're really important. But go on.
okay. So it wasn't getting any better. And at that point, I found out about the 80 parenting community. Um, and to be honest, I think at the time I thought it was going to be an alternative to getting professional therapy, because she had been so resistant to going to a therapist. I thought, well, the only option I've got then, I'll educate myself. I'll feel that I'm not alone, and I'll go from there. So I'd almost sort of written off getting a therapist for her at that stage. But I joined, and I loved the online course. It's on like an app called Teachable, and so I was able to just have that on my mobile phone, and there are little sort of short bursts of videos on that I was able to work through and tick off. And
How'd that app
um,
work? Was that easy to? I've never even really tried the app.
yeah, it's great. Yeah, so you can just sort of click straight into it, and it starts where you've left off, and
That's
yeah,
cool.
it's very easy to use. So that's sort of separate from having to log into the sort of website and things. So
Yeah, and I'll just
it's
explain
very
really
good.
quick. I don't mean to keep interrupting you.
That's all
Uh,
right.
but when you join the AT parenting community, which is a membership community, you get free access. So what Joe is talking about is you get free access. So I have an online school, and it's totally separate from the membership, but it's so nice to just gift people access to that class, because then, and I actually gift them a difficult behavior class too. So you have access to that. That way, when people are starting to vent and complain, and wanting support in the membership, I know they have access to like a step-by-step course that will walk them through it. And then it makes me feel better, because I'm like, I know you have the tools. Um, Whether you have the energy to go through it, they're very quick videos, but I know that people are well supported. But they do have to log on to my online school, like which is what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And I think at the time I was so desperate to find some sort of tool to help myself that I was just thirsty for that knowledge. And I realized just how little I knew about it. And I thought, if I'm going to help my daughter, I need to educate myself on this thing that she's going through. So I just felt going through that, the most knowledge that I could gain in the easiest way. And it was very straightforward and clear for me. That helped massively, because I wasn't sort of drowning in this just chaos that seemed to be around at the time. So it did just give me a tool that I was able to focus on and feel like I was helping. And I think one of the biggest fears, and I mean, we can all sort of catastrophize and fear the future and what's the worst case that could go on and all that sort of thing. And I try and stop myself from doing that. I know that is just the easiest thing we could all do, but I just felt I had a direction then, and I had a focus, and I was able to do something that would improve things, because sometimes you just don't know if you're making things worse. And that was the biggest thing. I didn't want to be making it worse. I knew it was bad enough as it was. I would have just blamed myself and hated myself for making it worse. So that knowledge made me know that if I'm going to say no and not engage in this OCD behavior, that's okay. You
You're
know,
bringing up such a good point, because I'm doing this self-care series right now, and I've done it before. And it's interesting to watch people's comments. And one of the biggest struggles that parents were bringing up in our Facebook Live yesterday was, I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't know how to make it better. And even just some guidance, because treating OCD as a parent is completely counterintuitive. And so everything that you do maternally, like your gut instinct that says my child's in distress, so I need to do what they're telling me to do to decrease their distress, is the opposite of what you do for OCD. It's like the most counterintuitive parental approach. And I know I struggle with my kids too, because and I mess up a lot when they're in distress, and I'm like, oh, I just want to make that better. But instead I have to, coach them and give them skills, and it's not intuitive. So I think you're right. Like, even if your child doesn't want to do therapy, or you're having a hard time finding a therapist, sometimes parents just stop there and they're like, okay, well, I don't know what to do. And OCD, as you definitely know, is family affair. And so educating yourself, that's something you can do. And then even knowing, how am I supposed to respond to this? Like, what is the, quote unquote correct way to respond to this that's actually going to help, will be the opposite of what you typically think. So yeah, you're bringing up some really good points that I'm hearing a lot from parents.
yeah, and I think in my nature, I would always try and calm things down. I didn't want a big explosion in the house. I'd be sort of tiptoeing around, walking on eggshells, trying not to upset her, and that kind of fear. And sometimes I would, she would get upset, and I would just have to deal with that.
Yeah.
So that's tough to keep on and consistently do. And it's not 100%, it's maybe 70% of the time. But I do try and sort of resist getting involved and mixed up in some of those sort of requests that are made. Um, so going forward, I think by doing the course, I did realise that I did have to get a therapist for her. So,
Yeah.
this AT parenting community no longer became the alternative to getting therapy. It made me realise how serious it was. And I think one of the phases that, I say phase, but I'm not trying to trivialize that. I'm just saying that this, for her, it tends to go in waves of different themes crop
Yeah.
up here and there. So one of the sort of themes that she was doing at the time was not swallowing her own saliva. So it was a kind of contamination thing, and she was spitting everywhere. If she wasn't leaving spit on the floor, she'd be spitting in sort of the braids of her hair, or she'd
Hmm.
be spitting in her sleeve, on her wrist, to try and hide it. And I got concerned that it would go further and become an issue with eating. She literally got to the point where she would only swallow if she had food in her mouth. And
Hmm.
although she didn't sort of have any food aversion, I started to wonder if she would choke if she literally wasn't swallowing properly.
Right. Yeah.
And the skin around her wrists was starting to get rashes from constantly rubbing against a wet sleeve. So it really was starting to affect the quality of her life. It wasn't like she was just having these funny little quirks, or
Right.
insisting the TV was on a certain number on the volume, and those sort of little things that are easy to ignore and say
Hmm.
it's just her. It really was starting to get quite worrying. So at that point, I managed to find a therapist. And I think in the UK, we have something called CALMS, which is the Child Adolescent Mental Health Service, and that's linked to the NHS. So that's free, but it really is sort of overloaded. There's a massive long waiting lists. And I think it feels like it's much more focused on ADHD and some other sort of childhood mental health issues. And I just thought to myself, you know what, if I can afford a meal out or a holiday, I can sure as hell afford to get her help right now. So if it came to it, I'd only eat toast for a year so that I could get the help she needs, so she can live a better life, because it was starting to affect the quality of her life. So I looked up some therapists online. I sort of compared a few. I thought, which ones would she probably warm to? And then came trying to persuade her to go and see a therapist,
So let
which,
me
which was
pause
tough.
that. Yeah, that's very tough. We're going to spend some time talking about that. But I do have a lot of, there's a lot of UK members in the AT parenting community. How did you find an OCD therapist? I always get asked that about UK providers.
It's very difficult, actually. I had to look up. Trying to think. I think you suggested a few.
Is it
I think I went to.
ukocd.org?
Yes, I think there was probably somewhere, but I looked up, and some therapists list it as one of the sort of things that they can specialize in. So I think I found a few who seemed more like an OCD specialist, and I knew the importance of trying to. You've done some sort of podcasts and some videos on how to find the right therapist, and make sure that, and the right therapist for a child as well. So I sort of followed the advice there. So I sort of I mean, there are so many, but I discounted people who didn't have OCD listed at all.
Yeah.
Um, I then had to narrow it down to people that were working with children as well. Um, there was one who I was familiar with who was highly recommended, but she only worked with people over, I think, 16.
Mm.
So we couldn't use that person. So, and in the end, I think I found, and sometimes you phone people and they don't even respond.
Yeah.
That's
So
frustrating as
hard. Yeah.
well. Probably just too busy. So eventually, I found someone who seemed to have sort of some OCD knowledge and was used to working with children, and we were able to go and sort of talk to her, and I was able to see the room where she sort of practiced, and so I was happy with that. So I would say she wasn't as much of an OCD specialist as I would have liked, but she was good. And as I was saying, very difficult to get my daughter to agree to go. She was very self-conscious about opening up and discussing her feelings with someone outside of the family or
Yeah.
someone she didn't know. So I just had to sort of say to her, look, we'll go along, we'll meet this person. If you decide I don't want to see her again, I don't want to speak to her, then we'll leave it there. There's no pressure. You don't have to go with this person, because, as you know, they have to have a bit of chemistry there, don't they? Or at
Definitely.
least want to talk to this person. Um,
And I
and
like that you
luckily for.
did. I like that you were, that's a really good approach. You were like not all or nothing. You weren't like authoritative. You were like, let's just give it a try and see how it feels. And I think that that little gateway, if there's any wiggle room that they possibly will go, that approach is the best. That it's not this like definitive thing. It's like just try it. So she was willing to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So luckily she was willing, because I think she felt she was in control of the
Hmm.
decision ultimately.
Right.
So that's that appeals to her.
Yeah.
And when we got there, the therapist had a lovely dog, and Kimberly was able to sit and play with the dog while she was
That was nice.
talking. So that was a real win. So she ended up leaving there, and she said, yeah, I'll go back there, because I think she sort of knew that if she didn't go back there, we would keep trying and we would keep looking for someone else. So
Yeah.
um, she said, no, I'll settle with that person.
Yeah.
Um, and she had a comfortable area. She had like the little sort of sand pit thing. I think you've
Hmm.
spoken about that before as well, where they can do that. So she always liked doing that in her sessions. Um, so yeah, we managed to find a therapist eventually that she was happy to go to,
And it's good
which
that
was
you were
brilliant.
knowledgeable because sometimes I think parents give all their power away um, because they just feel like the mental health professional will know, and if they list OCD, they're very well versed in it. And you did your homework. You had all this knowledge. You knew how to treat OCD. You knew your role in it. You even knew what the therapist was supposed to do, and you knew what education to look for. a lot of times people are looking at the letters after someone's name instead of the training. And it's the training, because when I go to like an OCD conference with professionals, it's alphabet soup. We all have different letters after our names. But the thing that we have in common is the people that we follow, the people that we get training from, the people that we listen to and learn from. And so that's looking for that ERP. Do they do that exposure with response prevention, not just CBT? And then for us as parents, it's like, oh my gosh, okay. But then do they work with kids? And then are they kid friendly? Will they even call me back? So it's great that you did your homework and you knew. And even if you found someone who wasn't 100% what you would, imagine, you had the knowledge yourself to fill in the gaps, which I think is helpful too.
Yeah, yeah. So that worked really well, and I think she probably only actually had maybe about 8 sessions, I think, before we ended up going into lockdown last year, and then the sessions stopped. Um, Kim, my daughter didn't really want to do sort of online sessions. She didn't like the idea of going on sort of Zoom calls and things like that. She used to do tap dancing, and they started moving those to Zoom calls, and she
Oh,
hated that because I think one time the internet let her down, and she got sort of left the class, and she didn't want to
oh,
rejoin. And then again, and there is a level of anxiety. I know I said she's adamant she doesn't have it, but there is a sort of social element there where she would just be mortified to have to go back into
yeah.
a Zoom meeting. So at first she was very resistant to that, and she just didn't want to carry on with the counselling at the time, remotely. And I think to some extent she perhaps thought she could be overheard as well. So whereas it was very private for her in the house, and I would just wait outside in the car, um, you know, she sort of wanted a bit more of a feeling of privacy there, I think. There was also the option to potentially go for a walk, perhaps walk the dog with the therapist and have a conversation that way.
What a nice
Um,
flexible therapist. That's great.
yeah. But I think Kimberly was reluctant to do that. So the actual formal therapy kind of came to an end at that point. But she had made some brilliant strides forward within that time. There are still obviously sort of different themes that come up still, but I'm much more aware of looking out for them, and seeing how it goes. We tend to have the misophonia, so there's a lot of problems with anyone that's breathing or yawning, eating, whispering, all
I
that kind of thing.
totally relate to
Sneezes
that.
and hiccups are fine, but anything with the breath,
Yeah.
she absolutely hates.
Yeah.
Um, and it's funny really because with COVID at the moment, with everyone wearing a mask, she's actually quite happy with that. And
Yeah.
I think
Mhm.
sometimes I do wonder what will happen when people stop wearing masks when they're out and about, whether that's going to flare up some of the issues again.
Uh,
If a lot of our children are used to seeing people with masks and they all suddenly take them off at some point in the future,
Yeah, I think the
how's that going to
transition will
turn out?
definitely impact some people. Is it because is it helping the misophonia because she can't hear the breathing? Yeah.
I think so, yeah. And or if she hears the breathing, she thinks there's not the contamination coming out. So not only does she not
Right.
like the breathing, she thinks there's some sort of contamination as
That's
well
what I was
with the
wondering,
breath.
if it was one or the other, because I mean, I could see where it could be beneficial for OCD too. So, yeah, I think there is a little weird security there for some kids having that mask on and knowing that they're not being breathed on.
Yeah, yeah. So and there's also some sort of just right OCD. There's sometimes the sort of balancing out, tapping equal
Hmm.
sides. And I mean, our thing at the moment is door slamming. So the door has to uh, close a certain way. She has recently moved bedrooms actually, but her old bedroom she actually just completely damaged the door. And I know she's not slamming it in anger because it is
Mm-hmm.
just the way she moves about the house. It'll be whether it's a cupboard door or her bedroom door, it all has to get slammed or closed
Hmm.
exactly the way she wants it. So sometimes we have sort of 2 or 3 slams as well.
Yeah.
So in terms of exposures, of course, we sort of try to leave the door open, don't close it at all, um, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And
Um,
it sounds like you guys are aware of what approaches to do. You know, these things will pop up. Um, I really feel like OCD doesn't go away. It gets tiny, and it gets manageable. And having that skill of knowing, okay, and hopefully her awareness of me slamming these things is growing my OCD. And so if I want to fight, then maybe I need to like be really soft with it, or maybe I need to leave it open.
yeah, so sometimes I give her a challenge like, right, how softly can you close that? Can you close that door so that no one can hear it downstairs?
Yeah, yeah.
That kind of thing. So yeah, almost half trying to make a game out of it, but not ignoring the fact that it's that thing in her mind that's insisting she closes it that way, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think compared to where we were, um, I don't feel as desperate as a parent and out of control as I did before when I was sort of first joined the AT parenting community. It definitely sort of gives you the tools that you need, so that, yeah, as I say, as a parent, that we know that we're not making things worse for the children. It helps the wider family as well. There were people in the family who dismissed it or said, "Oh, she's just getting away with bad behaviour." So I do have to. You've done some good podcasts on how to recognise when it's bad behaviour and when it's linked to OCD.
Yeah.
And I'm becoming more aware of the difference,
Mm-hmm.
which is brilliant. But it's always an onward journey, isn't it? And today I'm feeling positive and grateful as well. I think gratitude is really important, to just be thankful for those small wins that we get along the way, because this is just about putting one foot in front of the other sometimes. And we can have really bad days, but we just have to take each day as it comes. And I heard someone say the other day that the only way out is through. And I think sometimes you just have to go through some really hellish times, but equip yourself with the tools that you need, which is brilliant from AT parenting community. And you will get through it. And although the journey's not completely over for me, I completely know that, but at least I feel um, a little bit more in control with the knowledge and the tools that you've been able to give me.
Yeah, and I love to hear that. And I think you have a really good outlook because um, the journey's never over. You know, like life's journey is never over, and the journey with OCD is never over. And acknowledging that, I think is good for you, but also for her to know. I was actually just talking to a girl yesterday that I've been working with forever. And she's actually going to come on the podcast. She asked if she can come on the podcast, which I thought was really cool. Um, and I was doing maintenance therapy with her, and I've been doing maintenance therapy with her for quite a while, actually. So like I haven't seen her in 3 months. So I saw her again, and she's saying, I'm having intrusive thoughts, and I'm having my OCD thoughts, but I'm not doing any compulsions. And so I said, well, tell me what you're doing. And she was doing all the right things. She was like, I was recognizing the thought. Sometimes I'll do the opposite and try to annoy it, or sometimes I'll just let it be. And I was like, yeah, she's like, I don't even know if I need these maintenance sessions, because like I recognize it and I know it's always going to be there, but I also am really well trained. And the mom was there too. And she's like, and I know what to do too. And so that's really where we want to go. And you're going to hit bumps. I hit bumps with my kids. I'll have a lull where I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody is doing good. It's like, no one's on fire. And then I know that, it's possible next month things can really go awry, but that my kids have the skills and then I have the knowledge to pick that back up again. And it sounds like that's where you're at, where you have the knowledge and your daughter has the knowledge. You're going to hit bumps, but I love how you said celebrate those small wins, and have that gratitude for those moments where you're like, oh, it's really good right now, or it's better than what it was. So I appreciate
Yeah,
you sharing your story.
that's okay. And I absolutely love listening to the podcast. I did used to listen to them on my way home from work when we weren't working from home. But I would put one on, just to almost sort of have that bridge between work and home. And I felt it sort of equipped me for whatever was going to happen that evening. And I just have a few more tips that I'd be able to use and put into effect. And it's also helped me myself. I've learned a lot about myself from it as well, and the sort of grown as a person. And there are things about me that I wouldn't have ever thought were sort of OCD traits, which actually absolutely are. And you know, you can have it quite sort of minor. As I actually was told a really good analogy when as I said, I'm a mental health first aider at work, um, and we were given an analogy where um, if you have obsessive compulsive tendencies, then it's just that if you're doing the washing up and you do the cutlery first and then the plates, and you're doing the plates and someone comes and just dumps some cutlery in the bowl, you sort of go, oh. But OCD, you would probably start the washing up from scratch again, and you would rewash the cutlery going through it.
Exactly.
And I always sort of, I sort of understood that analogy, that I just have a few minor tendencies that have never, thankfully, interrupted my life. But you know, as parents, we never really realize, or I didn't, when I became a parent, realize what a journey and what a challenge this could be. But you know, it gives us resilience to go forward, and how much we can learn about ourselves and our family is wonderful.
Yeah, it is a weird sideways gift because I feel the same way. I feel like my growth as a person and my mental health growth didn't happen until my kids started to have their issues. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have these things too. It's interesting how they're like little mirrors into our soul. You're like,
Yeah.
that was me. And a lot of times in the community, in the AT parenting community, I hear a lot of parents saying stuff like, I'm getting better. Or I actually had a mom recently who told me, it was like the biggest compliment I've ever gotten in therapy, where she said, my therapist told me that I'm improving because of my daughter's therapy. And I was like, it was so touching, because I think that we can learn from our kids. And we do talk a lot about ourselves in the AT parenting community. There's a lot of um, live classes that we do that are mainly focused on our mental health or what we're getting. And so many parents are saying, wow, I have OCD traits, I have anxiety traits. And that knowledge is actually really helpful, because then we improve and we grow as our children grow. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for coming on and sharing your story.